I was sitting in a small, humid cafe near Sanam Luang last August, watching the old TV mounted in the corner. Next to me was a man in a bright orange shirt, leaning forward so far he was almost off his stool. On the screen, a group of elderly men in dark robes were reading a judgment. My neighbor was vibrating with a quiet sort of hope. After all, his candidate had secured millions of votes. He kept muttering, "Finally, the people's choice." But as the judge continued, that hope didn't just fade, it curdled. The court wasn't talking about embezzlement or treason, they were talking about ethics. They were dissecting the prime minister's internal integrity, as if they were examining a soul rather than a legal record. When the judge finally uttered the phrase, "lack of evident honesty," the man next to me went deathly pale. In an instant, the will of millions of voters was effectively deleted, not by a tank or a street protest, but by a subjective definition of goodness. What struck me wasn't just the shock on his face, but the absolute clinical precision of the act. If you talk to the traditional elite in Bangkok, they'll tell you this is how you protect the nation, by ensuring only virtuous people hold power. But if you look closer, you realize that in modern Thailand, morality has been precision engineered into a high-caliber political weapon. There is an invisible cultural constitution written in the shadows of Thai society, one that values patronage and gratitude over the ballot box. While the world watches Thailand tear up and rewrite its physical constitutions every few years, this invisible law remains untouched, mutating into a system where judges have become the ultimate architects of truth. It's a world where you can win the election, but lose the soul of the law before you even take your seat. This is the story of how being good became the most dangerous legal trap in the world.
Man, I mean, the sheer velocity and the impact of that system you just described, it's honestly breathtaking.
Yes, it's hard to watch in real time.
Right, but, you know, it doesn't just operate in a vacuum. It requires this specific environment where moral authority completely supersedes electoral mandate.
The votes almost don't matter.
Yeah. And to really grasp this for our deep dive today, we have to look at the lived reality of the people caught inside it. Because the abstraction of, like, virtue, it has very real, very heavy physical consequences.
Right, and to make this concrete, let's look at the experience of a local administrative officer. Let's call him Arthit.
Okay, Arthit. Yeah.
So he's stationed in a northern province, and I want you to picture a remarkably humid afternoon, like the kind of heat that just presses right against your chest.
Yeah, where the air just feels thick and, you know, completely unyielding.
Yeah. So Arthit is sitting at his government-issued desk, and there's just a single bead of sweat tracing the line of his jaw. And in front of him is this huge stack of authorization documents for a new irrigation project.
And, well, as you know from following the mechanics of local Thai politics and our sources, these irrigation projects are rarely just about water, right? They're essentially the arteries of local power.
Exactly. And this specific project that Arthit is looking at is fundamentally flawed. Like, he's looking at the blueprints, and the engineering is totally substandard.
I'm guessing the routing is an issue too?
Absolutely. The proposed routing of the canals conspicuously bypasses the fields of the poorest farmers in the area. Instead, it redirects the water directly toward land owned by a prominent local elder.
Right. An elder who, we really should know, is deeply connected to the traditional power centers back in the capital. I mean, this isn't just some wealthy farmer. This guy is a major node in a massive patronage network.
Yes. And that connection right there is what creates the paralyzing weight of the moment for Arthit, because he is holding his pen literally suspended right over the signature line.
Wow. He knows what he's doing.
He does. He knows the legal implications of signing it. He knows the ethical implications. But his thoughts in that moment, they do not turn to administrative codes or statutory regulations.
Right, because, I mean, the statutory regulations aren't the rules that actually govern his daily life.
Instead, his mind involuntarily shifts to his daughter. Because she just received a university scholarship.
Yes, a scholarship funded by this elder.
Fully funded by a foundation controlled by that very same elder.
Oh, wow.
For Arthit, the unwritten rules of Thai society materialize right there in that suffocating office as this massive, tangible atmosphere of social debt. The highest virtue demanded of him right then isn't bureaucratic integrity. It is katanyu.
Katanyu, right, which is this profound, non-negotiable gratitude. It is basically the absolute cornerstone of this social architecture.
Yes.
Because being recognized as a good person within this specific network means possessing the absolute inability to say no to a patron. You just can't do it.
So he signs the documents. Yeah. And weeks later, Arthit is standing on this dirt road, and he's just watching the construction dust settle over the parched fields of those bypassed farmers. He knows water is never going to reach them.
Devastating.
And the profound shame he experiences in that moment stems from this crushing realization. His status as a good man in the eyes of the elite, his so-called virtue, is entirely synonymous with his silence.
It's a really tragic scene, but what we are witnessing with Arthit is really just the localized microscopic execution of a macro-political phenomenon.
Right, it's a fractal of the whole system.
Exactly. The social debt, the enforcement of katanyu, the bypassing of the poor to serve the patron, none of these are anomalies. They aren't corrupt deviations from the system. This is the system functioning exactly as it was designed to function.
Yes. Because if we look at the written constitutions of Thailand, the physical documents outlining the government structure, they function very much like easily replaceable applications on a smartphone.
Oh, I like this analogy.
Because you can delete an app, you can download a new one, update the interface, change the user permissions, whatever. But the system that forced Arthit's hand, this deep network of patronage and forced gratitude, that is the smartphone's underlying, unalterable operating system.
Because, you can download a new, shiny pro-democracy app, but if the operating system itself is built on a feudal hierarchy, well, it's just going to recognize that app as malware.
Yes, it's going to quarantine it.
Exactly. It's going to restrict its permissions entirely.
It is the core programming that dictates what those temporary applications are actually allowed to do, regardless of what the user interface displays to the public.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the academic framework established by the historian Nidi Osewong, because he articulated this exact concept.
The cultural constitution, right?
Right, the Thai cultural constitution. And this unwritten constitution is what governs the true power relations within the country. It's the definitive arrangement of authority.
And crucially, as our sources point out, it isn't drafted by legal scholars in some parliamentary committee.
It is rooted in centuries-old hierarchical structures. I mean, you can trace its visibility all the way back to ancient legal codes like the Three Seals Law.
The Three Seals Law.
Yeah. In that historical context, equality wasn't based on inherent human rights. The concept of a modern citizen simply did not exist. Equality, or rather the strict legally enforced lack of it, was fundamentally based on your birth and your royal granted status. Completely. The cultural constitution dictates a very specific directional flow. Power flows downward through a strict hierarchy, and obedience, which is framed as a moral duty, flows upward.
No, but I mean, the structural integrity of this operating system has to rely on more than just historical momentum, right? Because history fades over time.
Absolutely. To maintain its legitimacy across generations, it requires an active, continuous ideological engine.
And that ideological engine operates through a very specific triad nation, religion, and monarchy. The state's interaction with religion is particularly critical to understand here, because this isn't just like organic belief, it is managed ideology.
Managed how? Exactly.
Well, starting in the reign of King Rama V, so during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the state systematically brought Buddhism under strict bureaucratic control.
Really? So the state actually stepped in and reorganized the religious institutions.
The Sangha, which is the Buddhist monastic order, was completely reorganized to perfectly mirror the state administration. And through this centralization, religious doctrines were effectively transformed into a tool for state ideology.
Wow, they essentially co-opted the religion.
They did. The state adopted the Buddhist cosmological order, which you prominently find in texts like the Trihumikatha. And that text essentially maps out a universe of very strict moral hierarchies.
Right. This is where we get into the concepts of karma and parami, isn't it?
Exactly. Think of parami like a cosmic spiritual credit score.
A cosmic credit score. I love that.
Right. Because in this cosmological framework, karma represents the accumulation of your past actions, and parami means merit or spiritual perfection. So the ideology asserts that those who hold power today do so because they possess superior parami.
Meaning they earned it in past lives.
They are inherently more virtuous due to the merit they've accumulated over countless lifetimes.
So it's not just that they are lucky or born wealthy or happen to have better connections. The system literally tells the public that they are fundamentally better souls.
Therefore, if you challenge the political hierarchy, you are not merely engaging in a secular political disagreement. You are framed as launching a direct blasphemous challenge against the cosmic moral order itself.
I'm stuck on something here. If modern democratic societies rely on good citizens who participate equally and, actively challenge their leaders, how does this Thai system reconcile the demand for cosmic obedience with the illusion of a modern democracy? Because those two things are oil and water. How do they not just shatter the whole system?
That is the core friction, and they reconcile it by completely redefining what constitutes value in a human being within the political sphere. We have to clearly delineate the difference in Thai political society between a good citizen and a good man, what is known as a kondi.
Okay, so what is the difference between a good citizen and a kondi?
So a good citizen, in the framework of a modern democratic state, exercises civic virtues. They demand equality before the law, they protect minority rights, they respect majority rule.
Right, they vote, they protest, they engage.
Exactly. And most importantly, they hold those in power accountable through institutional mechanisms. They ask questions.
Okay, and a kondi, a good man.
A kondi operates on a completely different axis. A good man strictly adheres to a hierarchical moral code. Their primary virtues are fulfilling duties based on their specific social status, avoiding any disruption to the established order, and showing absolute gratitude to their patrons and superiors.
So basically, keeping your head down and knowing your place.
Yes. And this is exactly why the traditional elite views the modern electoral system as inherently flawed.
Because it doesn't reward that specific type of behavior.
Right. In their eyes, elections distribute power based on mere popularity and majority will, not on inherent moral superiority or accumulated parami. Because the elite believe the electoral system fundamentally fails to identify and elevate the kondi, they find complete justification for non-democratic intervention.
Wow. So they don't even see themselves as destroying democracy when they intervene.
They view overturning an election not as a violation of democratic rights, but as a necessary moral correction. They truly believe they are stepping in to protect the state from those who lack virtue.
And this brings us to the collision point. Because when this deeply ingrained moral hierarchy, this unwritten cultural demand for good men, is forced to interact with modern legal frameworks, the result is a highly destructive form of legal warfare.
It's incredibly destructive.
The abstract concepts of Parami and katanyu are just yanked out of the realm of personal spirituality and weaponized directly within the courtroom.
Yeah, the translation of cultural superiority into judicial verdicts is where that abstract operating system we talked about earlier executes its most lethal commands.
To see just how lethal, let's trace the trajectory of a young legislative aide, what's called Niran. And this is during the massive wave of political disqualifications in 2019.
Yes.
So the scene unfolds in a cramped, windowless office building right in the center of Bangkok. The air conditioning is humming aggressively, like really rattling the ceiling tiles. But the atmosphere inside the committee room is entirely suffocating. Yeah. Niran is sitting against the back wall, his notebook is open, and he's just observing the proceedings.
And, these committee rooms are explicitly designed to be intimidating. They're essentially modern arenas of inquisition.
Absolutely. At the center of the room sits a highly charismatic, newly elected member of parliament. This MP had secured hundreds of thousands of votes by campaigning aggressively on institutional reform. But right now, he is being grilled by an appointed committee over a minor, decade-old administrative oversight regarding a negligible media shareholding.
Right, a classic pretext. We see that constantly in the sources.
Right. And Niran is focusing on the physical details. Like the MP's hands are visibly shaking. He has them tucked carefully beneath the heavy wooden table to hide the tremor from the news cameras that are panning across the room.
That's got to be terrifying for him.
And across from him sit the committee members. Their eyes are just cold. They look almost completely bored by the process. They speak in these calm, paternalistic tones, lecturing the MP on political ethics and the sanctity of the institution.
It's the tone of a parent scolding a disobedient child, isn't it?
Exactly. And sitting in the back, Niran experiences this sudden, chilling realization. This isn't a fact-finding mission. This is the clinical execution of a political career. The law is being wielded exactly like a scalpel to validate a predetermined moral verdict.
Because the verdict was decided before he even walked in.
Exactly. The total destruction of this popular politician is achieved through a brief 3-page legal document centered entirely on the concept of virtue. It's meant to remind newcomers that the traditional elite always wins.
What's fascinating here is the systemic transition from military force to judicial procedure. I mean, decades ago, Naren would have been watching tanks roll down the street. Today, he watches a committee calmly read from a binder.
It's much quieter, but just as effective.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have to formally define two terms in the Thai context to really understand this shift: lawfare and judicial activism.
Okay, let's lay those out next.
So lawfare is the use of the legal system and its institutions to damage or delegitimize an opponent. It is basically achieving through the courts what you cannot achieve through the ballot box.
And judicial activism?
Judicial activism occurs when courts step beyond their traditional role of just interpreting the law and they begin actively shaping political outcomes. Frequently, this means overturning the actions of the elected branches.
So the judiciary stops being a referee and becomes a star player for one team.
Exactly. In Thailand, the judiciary has effectively established itself as a veto power over elected officials. This creates what political scientists term a tutelary democracy.
A tutelary democracy, meaning like a democracy under guardianship.
Right. The procedural mechanics of elections still take place. Citizens still line up, they cast their votes, the ballots are counted. But non-elected elites maintain ultimate control.
They just sit above the whole process.
They possess the structural authority to override electoral mandates whenever they see fit. And we have seen this executed with clinical precision over and over. The Thai Constitutional Court and the Supreme Court have systematically neutralized major political threats by disqualifying elected prime ministers. I mean, look at Thaksin Shinawatra and Yingluck Shinawatra.
Right, both ousted by judicial or quasi-judicial means. It goes beyond individuals, right? They dissolve entire parties.
Yes. They have utilized these powers to dissolve major pro-democracy political parties entirely. They instantly eliminated entities like Thai Raksa Chat and the Future Forward Party from the political landscape.
Just wipe them out.
Exactly. Millions of votes simply erased by a gavel.
As you know from tracking these cases, the core mechanism driving this juristocracy is the conversion of subjective moral values into rigid, actionable legal requirements. This introduces the concept of contextual ethics,
which is a very dangerous concept.
When undefined, inherently subjective terms like evident honesty and integrity are codified directly into the Constitution, the judiciary gains absolute monopolistic power to interpret what goodness actually means.
Because there is no objective scientific metric for evident honesty. You can't put it on a scale. Therefore, the definition belongs entirely, 100%, to the judges.
And this creates a severe chilling effect across the entire political spectrum. It paralyzes the executive and legislative branches. Legal terminology ceases to be a set of clear boundaries like a speed limit sign, and instead becomes a weaponized, entirely unpredictable variable.
You never know when you're crossing the line.
Right. A politician cannot navigate the law when the law is defined by the shifting moral parameters of an unelected committee.
If the courts are institutionally independent, meaning the military or politicians do not directly appoint them, and judges rise through a meritocratic internal career track, why do these judges consistently, almost uniformly, rule in ways that dismantle elected governments and favor the traditional power structures?
Yeah, that is the million-dollar question right there. If they aren't taking direct orders from a general, why are they all ruling the exact same way?
The answer lies in the deep ideological alignment of the judiciary. The independence of the Thai courts is institutional, but it is absolutely not ideological. Judges are deeply embedded in the Kandi discourse.
They are the good men enforcing the rules of the good men.
From their education, through their exams, all the way up their career advancement, they are heavily acculturated. They are trained to view themselves not merely as arbiters of statutory text, but as the ultimate guardians of the nation's moral fabric and its specific constitutional identity.
An identity explicitly defined as democracy with the king as head of state.
Exactly. So when these judges face a populist politician who threatens the traditional hierarchy, they do not see a legitimate democratic representative expressing the will of the people. They see an existential threat to the moral order of the nation.
And we can't ignore the incentive structures here either, right? Because this ideological alignment is heavily reinforced by a system of tangible reward.
Absolutely. It's highly incentivized.
Judges who issue extreme rulings, such as dissolving anti-military opposition parties or banning popular leaders from politics, are frequently rewarded with highly prestigious appointments post-retirement.
Yes. Appointments to the King's Privy Council, which is the highest advisory body in the country, have been granted to judges immediately following their rulings in major dissolution cases.
It essentially proves that extreme judicial activism, operating under the guise of protecting morality, is highly profitable and prestigious for the judges' careers. It is the ultimate fast track to the highest echelons of elite society.
But, if the courts are the weapon executing this lawfare, the physical constitution itself had to be systematically modified to become the high-caliber ammunition.
They need a legal basis to pull the trigger.
Exactly. The judges need a text to point to. The evolution of Thailand's legal framework over the last 2 decades is not a series of random adjustments. It is a deliberate, highly engineered trajectory.
To really feel the reality of this legal engineering, we need to look at the physical documents themselves. Let's consider the life of Suchin. He's a retired archivist who spent 30 years cataloging and filing government records in the deep storage facilities of Bangkok.
Okay, I love this perspective.
Yeah, picture him late at night. The only sound is the constant hum of the climate control systems designed to preserve the paper. Suchin sits at his metal desk, contrasting the physical and emotional weight of 2 very different documents.
It's like a tangible history of the country's political decay right there on his desk.
But first, he holds the 1997 People's Constitution. He notes the thick, high-quality paper, the expansive, inclusive language. He calls it the weight of possibility. It is a document that felt expansive, designed to grant power outward, away from the center, down to the citizenry.
Right. It was drafted with immense public participation. It was genuinely optimistic.
But then, he places the 2017 Constitution right next to it. He describes the 2017 version as being filled with the fine print of suspicion.
Fine print of suspicion. That is incredibly accurate.
Because he compares the drafts, literally tracing the evolution of specific clauses over 20 years. The realization sets in. He sees how ethical codes, which were originally designed in 1997 to empower the public against corruption, had been slowly, deliberately weaponized.
They were transformed into exclusive standards that could only be judged and enforced by the traditional elite.
Exactly. And Suchin experiences this profound, quiet grief in the total silence of the archives. He realizes the law has morphed. What used to be a bridge connecting the people to the state has been reconstructed into a cage designed to contain them.
The law itself became the trap.
The cultural constitution is a living, ever-changing labyrinth, drafted with ink that never truly dries. And it's designed specifically to erase the legislative footprints of the common man and keep the levers of power firmly locked in traditional hands.
So how exactly did the text shift so dramatically? I mean, if we analyze Thailand's constitutional history over the last 2 decades chronologically, it serves as a global masterclass in legal engineering.
How did they pull this off?
Well, the ultimate goal of this engineering is the systematic institutionalization of competitive authoritarianism.
Okay.
It's a system where the playing field is heavily structurally skewed. Legal mechanisms are actively utilized to cripple the opposition, and the ruling elite maintains power while preserving a thin, very fragile veneer of democratic procedure.
Let's break down this timeline so we can see how they built it. The starting point of this chronological analysis is that 1997 Constitution, which is widely recognized as the genesis of hope. It was globally praised as one of the most progressive and participatory constitutions in the developing world.
It was a huge deal at the time.
Its primary design objective was to stop money politics and eradicate systemic corruption.
And to achieve this, the 1997 Constitution created powerful independent bodies. This is when we see the birth of the Constitutional Court and various anti-corruption commissions.
But there is a critical distinction to make here. At this stage, in 1997, ethical standards were primarily intended as guidelines for expected conduct. They were aspirational frameworks.
They weren't weapons yet.
Exactly. They were not the lethal political weapons they would later become. They were saying, this is how a politician should act, not if a judge feels you didn't act this way, you are banned for life.
The fundamental shift, the real turning point, occurred with the 2007 transition to enforcement. And this directly followed the 2006 military coup. The elite recognized a terrifying reality. The democratic institutions and independent bodies created in 1997 could not control the immense popularity of elected majorities.
Because the electoral machinery was consistently producing leaders who threatened the traditional hierarchy.
Exactly. The people were voting for the wrong candidate.
Right. And they couldn't have that.
No. Therefore, the 2007 Constitution fundamentally altered the nature of the independent bodies. It elevated ethical standards from mere guidelines into legally binding disciplinary offenses. This marked the official codification of morality. Cultural abstractions, previously governed by social pressure and public opinion, now carried severe, enforceable legal weight.
Suddenly, the Constitutional Court aggressively expanded its own jurisdiction far beyond its original mandate. They even claimed the unprecedented power to annul entire general elections.
Which is just staggering when you think about it.
If they didn't like the result, they could simply void the entire democratic exercise.
Which brings us to the ultimate evolution. Because you have to wonder, how far could this codification of morality be pushed before the democratic system entirely collapsed? The answer arrived with the 2017 Apex of Mutation.
And this was drafted strictly under the supervision of the military junta following the 2014 coup, correct?
Exactly. The 2017 Constitution perfected the weaponization of ethics. In this document, a severe violation of ethical standards became a juridical weapon of maximum unconditional destruction.
Let's explain how wild that is. The law was engineered to allow virtually anyone to petition for the dissolution of a political party.
Yes. Practically anyone could file a grievance claiming an ethical violation, and that triggered a formal process. It granted the Constitutional Court the extraordinary power to bypass the electoral process entirely.
So they didn't even need the voters anymore.
They could issue immediate removals of elected officials and impose lifetime bans from political participation based entirely on subjective ethical violations.
And we can observe the absolute culmination of this legal engineering in a very recent, very shocking event from our sources. Constitutional Court ruling 212567 regarding Prime Minister Sretha Thavisin.
How does a sitting prime minister get removed without committing a crime? Because this case is the perfect encapsulation of everything we've discussed. Sretha was entirely removed from the office of the prime minister.
But he wasn't removed for a provable act of corruption. Right?
No, he wasn't removed for embezzlement. He wasn't removed for treason.
He was removed on the entirely subjective grounds of lacking evident honesty and integrity due to a decision he made regarding a cabinet nomination.
Right, and what is critical to understand about this case is the methodology of the court. How did they arrive at that ruling? The court relied heavily on the concept of public suspicion to justify the penalization.
Wait, public suspicion, not actual evidence of wrongdoing, just suspicion.
Exactly. They argued that because the public might suspect a lack of integrity regarding this cabinet appointment, the ethical standard was breached. This entirely bypassed any formal legal due process required to establish objective guilt.
So there was no need to prove a crime.
None. The prime minister of a sovereign nation was removed because unelected judges decided his internal morality did not meet an undefined, abstract standard of goodness.
When we connect this back to our fundamental understanding of how a state is supposed to function, a terrifying paradox emerges. The entire global architecture of democracy relies on the rule of law, the principle that the law is supreme, objective, and applies equally to all, protecting citizens from the arbitrary exercise of power. In Thailand, this concept is translated as niditham.
But under the guise of upholding niditham, Thailand has definitively descended into rule by law.
Break down the difference there because it's subtle but catastrophic.
In a rule of law system, the law restrains the powerful. It protects the people. In a rule by law system, the legal framework is systematically distorted and weaponized by the powerful against everyone else.
So the law becomes a tool of oppression, not a shield.
Exactly. The law is not an objective shield for civil rights. It is a highly calibrated tool utilized exclusively to maintain the systemic advantage of the ruling elite. The language of the law remains intact. They still use words like justice, integrity, and constitution, but its soul has been entirely inverted.
The irreversible damage done to the concept of the rector state, a state firmly governed by the rule of law, cannot be overstated here.
No, it really can't. As long as the unwritten cultural constitution dominates public law, and as long as the judiciary willingly acts as the political executioner for the traditional elite, the cycle of democratic breakdown in Thailand will continuously repeat.
It's just going to keep happening.
The structural tension between these rigid, highly ambiguous ethical standards enforced from above and the complex realities of a modern, pluralistic society demanding equal representation from below will only generate increasingly severe friction. You cannot govern a 21st century democracy using a 15th century cosmological hierarchy without eventually tearing the social fabric apart.
When a state monopolizes the definition of goodness and encodes it into the machinery of the law, morality ceases to be a compass for human behavior and becomes, instead, the ultimate unbreakable shackle of authoritarian control.